For most of recorded history, we have been taught that civilization began roughly 5,000 years ago in the mud brick cities of Sumer and climbed in a single unbroken line all the way to us. But the Sumerians themselves left behind a record that quietly contradicts that story. A four-sided clay prism, now resting in a museum case in Oxford, lists 8 kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years before a great flood, 241,200 years in all, before the history we recognize even begins. Read one way, those 8 kings are not men at all. They are ages. 7 vanished worlds that rose, ruled, and fell, with our own civilization standing as the 8th. If that record means what it appears to mean, the timeline in our textbooks is not merely incomplete. It is dangerously short. What did the Sumerians believe they were remembering? In a quiet gallery of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford sits a small, unremarkable object that should not say what it says. It is a prism of baked clay, 4 sides covered in dense cuneiform, no taller than a man's forearm. Once, a wooden spindle ran through its center so that a scribe could turn it and read each face in sequence. Scholars call it the Weld-Blundell Prism, and the text carved into it was copied roughly 1,800 years before the Common Era, drawn from far older traditions. It claims to record the whole of kingship in the land of Sumer, from the very beginning down to the dynasty of Ison, and its very first line unsettles everyone who reads it carefully. After kingship descended from heaven, the prism says, the kingship was in Eridu, descended. Not created, not invented, not raised up by human hands. According to the scribes who carved it, rulership arrived from somewhere else, or some other time, already whole. What follows is stranger still. The opening section does not begin with men we can place in any ordinary chronology. It begins with 8 kings who ruled before a great flood, and the lengths of their reigns are not measured in years a human body could endure, but in tens of thousands of years each. The first king, Alulim, is given a reign of 28,800 years. The numbers climb and fall from there, king after king, until the scribe tallies the total with bureaucratic calm. In 5 cities, 8 kings reigned for 241,200 years. Then the flood swept over, 4 flat words set down with no more drama than a clerk recording a harvest, marking the end of an entire world. Dr. Thorkild Jacobsen, the Danish Assyriologist whose study of these lists became the standard scholarly edition, spent decades wrestling with that arithmetic. To most historians who came after him, the answer seems settled. These reigns are not literal lifespans. They are symbolic or political, or the product of an ancient number system we only partly understand. No king lived for 28,000 years. The figures, they argue, are a kind of mythological prologue, a flourish before the real history begins. And yet the prism itself refuses to draw that line. The scribe did not wall these godlike kings off as legend. He recorded their reigns in the same neat columns with the same careful formula as the later rulers whose existence we can confirm from other sources. The flood is the only divider. Above it, the impossible reigns. Below it, kings whose lifespans shrink century by century toward something recognizably human. The format insists that both belong to one continuous record, one unbroken ledger of kingship, reaching back into a darkness no other document dares to measure. That is the tension this prism leaves in the room. If these were merely myths, why catalog them with the precision of an accountant? Why give them cities, successors, and exact regnal years? The men who carved this believed they were preserving something real, a memory of rulers who came before the waters rose. The question is not only whether they were right, it is what exactly they thought they were counting. Look closer at the 8 names, and a pattern begins to surface beneath the impossible numbers. The list moves city by city, not in a single seat of power, but across 5 of them. At Eridu, Alulim, and Alalngar. Then kingship passes to Bad Tabira, where 3 rulers reign in turn, Enmenlu Ana, Enmen-Gal-Ana, and Dumuzid the shepherd. From there it moves to Larak and a single king, Ensipad-Zid-Ana, then to Sipar and Enmen-Dur-Ana, and finally to Shuruppak, where the eighth and last of the line takes the throne, a king named Ubara-Tutu. 8 rulers, 5 cities, kingship handed from place to place like a flame, carried through the dark. Here is a way of reading that list that the numbers themselves seem to invite. What if these were never meant to be men at all, but ages? Consider how we ourselves compress vast stretches of time into single names. We say the Victorian era, as though one woman shaped 7 decades. We say the Bronze Age, folding more than 1,000 years into 2 words. We name epochs after a figure who stands for the whole. The Sumerians, by this reading, were doing the same thing, only reaching back across a span far older and far stranger than anything we record. Read that way, the 8 kings become 8 chapters of a much longer book. 7 of them stand for 7 complete worlds, civilizations that rose, ruled their span, and collapsed, each reign a marker for an entire age of humanity. And the 8th holds a special place. Ubara-Tutu, the last king before the flood, ruled at Shuruppak. The texts remember that from his house came Ziusudra, the man who survived the deluge, the figure later traditions would echo as the one who outlived the drowning of the world. The instructions preserved in his city take the form of a father speaking to that surviving son. That detail matters, because the survivor's world is our world. If the 7 kings before the flood mark 7 vanished ages, then the line that passed through the flood, through Ubara-Tutu to the survivor, leads directly to the civilization counting the names today. We are not outside this list, watching it from a safe distance. We are the 8th age. The 7 lost worlds came before us. The 8th is us. The shape of the record reinforces the idea. After the flood, the rains do not snap to human length all at once. They shrink by stages, still long by any natural measure, then shorter again, as the list passes out of deep time and into a history we can begin to verify. It reads almost like a memory cooling as it nears the present, the unimaginable giving way slowly to the ordinary. None of this is how mainstream scholarship reads the prism. To most Assyriologists, the antediluvian kings are a legendary prologue, a frame placed before the genuine record to lend it the weight of cosmic authority. The epoch reading is a lens, not a proven fact, and it is fair to hold it as exactly that. But a lens can reveal a shape the surface had been hiding. And once you have seen the 8 kings as 8 ages, the obvious question sharpens. Is there anything in the ground itself that remembers a flood? The search now moves from clay to soil. If the prism is only poetry, the ground will be silent. If something real lies behind it, the earth should hold a trace. And in the south of what is now Iraq, the earth does hold something. Begin where the list itself begins, at Eridu, the place the scribes named as the first seat of kingship. Founded around 5,400 years before the Common Era, Eridu was remembered by the Sumerians as the oldest city in the world, the home of Enki, the god of fresh water and wisdom. It is the address the prism gives for the moment kingship descended from heaven. A real place, layered with centuries of mud brick, sitting exactly where the legend said the world began. Then, in the excavation season of 1928 and 1929, a few miles away at the city of Ur, Sir Leonard Woolley sank a deep shaft into the ground and found something that stopped his workmen cold. Beneath the layers of human occupation lay a thick band of clean, water-laid silt, somewhere between 8 and 11 feet of it, sterile mud with no pottery, no ash, no sign of life. Above it and below it, the debris of settled people. Woolley and his wife Catherine looked at that sterile layer and reached for the obvious conclusion. This was the flood. The deluge, remembered in Mesopotamian legend, echoed across so many later traditions, suddenly seemed to have dirt under its fingernails. But this is where honesty has to interrupt the drama. Woolley's own assistant, the archaeologist Max Mallowan, and the careful reappraisals that followed showed that the Great Flood at Ur was not what it first appeared. It was a local event. A devastating river inundation, certainly, vast enough that to the people who lived through it, the whole world seemed to drown, but not a single catastrophe that swallowed the earth. The proof was close at hand. Eridu, only a short distance away and clearly visible from Ur, showed no matching flood layer at all in the equivalent ground. Other cities, Kish to the north and Shuruppak, did preserve flood deposits, but they belonged to different periods entirely. The picture that best fits the evidence is a land repeatedly scarred by separate local floods, each terrible in its own moment, not one deluge that ended a world. That does not erase the mystery, it sharpens it. Because the memory of a great flood does not belong to Mesopotamia alone. The Sumerian Eridu Genesis, the deluge in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the flood stories carried by cultures scattered across continents that had no contact with one another all preserve the same essential shape. A world grown too large or too proud, a rising of the waters, a handful of survivors, a beginning again. These are remembered as worldview and inheritance, not confirmed as a single historical event, and no people's version stands above another's. So the ground gives a divided answer. It confirms that real floods carved themselves into the memory of this land, yet denies that any one of them drowned the whole earth, which leaves a far harder question hanging over the work. Why does the same memory of vanished ages and a great reset surface among peoples who never met? Widen the lens beyond Mesopotamia, and the same skeleton appears again and again, dressed in different languages. Across cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years, the deep past is told as a sequence of ages, each one declining from the last, each ending in catastrophe before the world begins anew. In India, the doctrine of the Yugas describes 4 such ages turning in an endless wheel. The Satya Yuga, the age of truth, is given 1,728,000 years. The Treta Yuga, 1,296,000. The Dvapara Yuga, 864,000. And the Kali Yuga, the dark final age in which the tradition places us, 432,000 years. 4 ages, falling in a clean 4, 3, 2, 1 ratio. The Greek poet Hesiod, writing around 700 years before the Common Era, told nearly the same story as the 5 ages of man, gold giving way to silver, to bronze, to heroes, to a bitter age of iron. The Aztecs counted 5 suns, 4 already destroyed. The Norse looked toward Ragnarok, a destruction and rebirth of all things. Then comes the detail that genuinely stops the breath. Return to the Sumerian list, to the 3rd king, En-men-lu-ana of Bad Tibira, and read the length of his reign. 43,200 years. Now set that beside the Hindu Kali Yuga of 432,000 years. The Sumerian figure is exactly 1/10 of it. The same string of digits, 4, 3, 2, surfacing in 2 traditions that on the standard map of history could never have spoken to one another. And it does not end there. The Babylonian priest Berossus, writing in the 3rd century before the Common Era, recorded 10 kings before the flood whose reigns together totaled 432,000 years. That same number again, carried in Mesopotamian hands. It is tempting to call this proof of a shared, inherited chronology, a single deep memory fractured across continents. but the honest account has to give the other side its full weight, and the other side is strong. The Sumerians counted in base 60, the sexagesimal system that still rules our clocks and our circles. In that system, 432,000 is not exotic at all. It is a round, deeply divisible number, the kind that falls naturally out of multiplying the building blocks of Babylonian astronomy. To most scholars, the echo between Sumer and India is not a smuggled memory, but a coincidence of mathematics, two cultures reaching for the same convenient figure because the same numerical logic pushed them toward it. This is contested ground, and it deserves to be named as contested. Yet notice what survives no matter which explanation you accept. Strip away the argument over the numbers, and the larger pattern still stands untouched. Peoples who never met, on land masses they did not know existed, all chose to remember the past in the same architecture, not one creation and one fall, but many. Ages stacked upon ages, each shorter and dimmer than the one before, each closing in disaster, each leaving fragments for the next to inherit. A coincidence of arithmetic explains a single shared number. It does not explain why the whole human family seems to remember the same broken staircase of time, unless something real once stood at the bottom of it. Something real may indeed stand at the bottom of that staircase, and it is written not in clay, but in the rise of the sea itself. Around 11,700 years ago, the last great ice age released its grip on the world. The vast sheets that had locked up the planet's water began to melt, and as they did, the oceans climbed. Over the long thaw, sea levels rose by something on the order of 120 meters, and not always gently. In sudden surges, the water advanced across the land, swallowing the low, flat, fertile coastlines where human beings have always gathered most thickly, because the coast is where the food is, where the rivers meet the sea, where life concentrates. Whole regions that had been dry ground for thousands of years vanished beneath the waves. Now hold that drowning against a gap in our own story. Our species has been anatomically modern for roughly 200,000 years, and behaviorally modern, capable of art, symbol, and planning for tens of thousands. Yet solid recorded history reaches back only about 10,000 years. Between those numbers lies a long darkness, a stretch of 40 or 50,000 years in which, by the standard account, very little of consequence happened. Hunter-gatherers, scattered bands, no cities worth the name. But what if that darkness is not empty? What if it is simply underwater? The ground keeps offering reasons to doubt the comfortable timeline. At Göbekli Tepe, in the hills of southeastern Turkey, the archaeologist Klaus Schmidt uncovered something that should not exist. Massive carved stone pillars, arranged in deliberate circles, raised around 9,500 years before the Common Era, by people who were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers with no agriculture, no writing, no kings. It is monumental architecture built thousands of years before the civilization that was meant to invent such things. And stranger still, at the end of its life, the whole complex was deliberately buried, packed with earth by the very people who had built it, as though they meant to preserve it or to seal something away. Other claims push further, and here caution has to take the wheel. Reports of submerged structures off the coast of India in the Gulf of Combat have circulated for years, but they remain disputed and unconfirmed, and it would be dishonest to present them as settled fact. They are an open question, not an answer, but the framework needs no sunken city to make its point. If sophisticated cultures had risen along those vanished coastlines before the waters came, their remains would now lie scattered across the drowned continental shelves, beyond the easy reach of any spade, buried under hundreds of feet of water and 12,000 years of sediment. We would not find their ruins because we cannot dig where they sleep. That is precisely the kind of lost world the prism in Oxford seems to insist upon, an age before the flood that left almost nothing we are able to recover. And that turns the eighth king from a curiosity into a mirror. If 7 ages drowned and 1 survived, then the survivor's line, the threshold the list points to, does not lead off into legend. It leads here. It points straight at US. Step back into the present and look hard at the civilization the list points toward. When the historical Sumerians step into the light of recorded history, they arrive almost too complete. Their base 60 mathematics appears fully formed, the system that still divides our hours and our circles. Their astronomy is already sophisticated, tracking the long, slow movements of the sky. Their cities, their writing, their law arrive with a maturity that seems to have no childhood, no slow centuries of fumbling toward the answers. The standard view holds that they simply invented it all with remarkable speed. The framework we have been following reads it differently, as inheritance, knowledge salvaged in fragments from the ages before and rebuilt on higher ground. That remains an interpretation, not a proven fact, and it is fair to hold it as one. But set that argument aside and look at the shape of the reigns again, because the shape alone says something unsettling. The earliest ages on the list span tens of thousands of years each. Every age after them is shorter. The span contracts and contracts as the record nears the present, as though time itself were speeding up. And if that pattern means anything, then our own age is the fastest and shortest yet. Consider what we have done in a mere 2 centuries, a sliver of any earlier epoch. We industrialized. We split the atom. We left the planet and walked in space. We built machines that begin to think. No age in the record ever moved like this. We are living in compressed time, burning through change at a rate the 7 ages before us never approached. That is where the warning hidden in the numbers begins to bite. 7 ages rose, ruled their span, and fell. Nothing in the list suggests the 8th is exempt. And the stresses that pull at our own world rhyme uncomfortably with the kinds of collapse the past remembers. A climate sliding out of its stable range. Resources drawn down faster than they return. A civilization so interconnected that a single failure can cascade across the whole of it. These are not prophecies, and no honest account would dress them as such. They are simply the familiar shapes of strain, the patterns that ended earlier worlds, now playing out on a planet-wide scale rather than a regional one. And yet, there is one difference between us and every age that came before, and it may be the only one that matters. The 7 lost worlds could not read their own story. They fell without ever knowing they were part of a sequence, without a record warning them what came before or what waited ahead. We are the first age that can hold the list in our hands and count the names. We can see the staircase of vanished ages descending behind us. We can recognize the pattern we are standing inside. The Sumerians, whatever they truly meant, seem to have set this record down so that someone, someday, would be able to do exactly that. The question the prism quietly hands forward is whether knowing the pattern is enough to step out of it, or whether the 8th age will simply read the warning, nod, and repeat it. So the prism sits in its case in Oxford, as it has for 4,000 years, saying the same 8 names to anyone who stops to count them. 8 kings, 7 lost worlds, 1 flood that divides the old record from our own, and an 8th age that turns out to be us. Whether those impossible numbers are the compressed memory of real civilizations swallowed by the sea, or simply the elegant arithmetic of a mind that counted in 60s, the Sumerians were certain of one thing they wanted carried forward. Ages rise, ages end, and no one alive ever believes their own will be counted among the fallen. The danger was never the flood itself. The danger is forgetting that there was one. If the list is right, and we truly are the 8th, what should this age leave behind for the 9th? Tell me what you think below.